So organizational design's probably the area that most SMEs are very weak at, and yet it is the area that has the potential to deliver extraordinary value. And it just however, it is common that this area is not really a topic discussed much in SMEs. The strange thing is that the SMEs have an extraordinary advantage because they're in usually when you've got an organization that is, 10 people and you start thinking about organizational design, you have the potential that as you grow, you're going to grow in a far more elegant way as opposed to it having to be on the edge of disorder and chaos all the time. And I think that's the learning I had. And I think it's I talk to all startup founders and say, look, if you can start just thinking this way as you're building your organization, as opposed to having to do change management and continuously restructure it later on, it's just so much easier. And I think I introduced that equation that talks about the geometric complexity of businesses as they grow. So founders often say, oh, look, going from 5 to 10 was hard, and from 10 to 20 was really hard, and from 20 to 40 was, extraordinarily hard. And so the equation was the R equals number of people times number of people minus 1 on 2. I can share it with people. But basically it means that if you have 10 people in a business and you have a potential for 10 times 9 on 2, 45 relationships. And then as it goes up to 20, it's 20 times 19 on 2, which is, 180 relationships. So that it's not, as organizations grow, the complexity grows. And this complexity is about how we organize ourselves. So how are we going to organize ourselves so that we can remain productive, keep our culture intact, deliver value to customers? How do we organize ourselves? So that's really the topic of today, is how do we organize ourselves? So if we move on through this, I'm going to, we've gone through 4 zones, and every time I explain that we have we reference the Organisational Resilience site that the federal government has. When you get this presentation, the URL's in there. So these different these 4 zones, if we are looking after each one of these 4 zones, we are building a resilient business. So building this final area of organisational design, I believe this is the one that for SMEs, as I've said, is something really, really worth leaning into. So let's get on with it. What does this mean? So I'm going to tell a story, and I'm going to tell a few stories today because I think it's the only way to really communicate this stuff in a way that really gets the underserved need I was trying to solve in my business, really communicates it. So in 2003, I had built a business on a star hub basis where there was Bill and I had 24 people, all, I hate that term reporting, but that's what it was, reporting to Bill. So we were on the edge of chaos. We were in disorder. So we were an organization that our offering was being recognized as being of great value in the marketplace. We were about to grow. We were even being pulled internationally. So we've got this situation. So I made a decision that we would have on Friday afternoons, we would have a all team meeting. So we would have the 24 people meet at about 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. Then we'd break out the beers and we'd go around the table and we'd have a conversation. And what I would do is I would go home that night very, very flat, you know, and I would have a couple of wines wondering what is going on here, because I was getting feedback that people were not happy. So we had lots of problems with different forms of productivity, demarcation disputes, cultural issues. And I said to myself, something's got to change here. And what I started to recognize is that we weren't role-based, we were personality-based. So we were designing our business on the principle of personalities. And so it was a lot of Bill, Jeff, Alison, Paul, Warren, Grace, and I started to recognize the dysfunction in this. So the person that had 50% ownership was not actually a person executing a role inside a choir, but our remuneration model was just based on our history. So we actually built our remuneration model for our salary based upon our ownership. And so we started to recognize that we hadn't had any, we were not conscious of the fact that we had different roles. So in 2003, I had the good fortune to go to the US. I went to the US all the time, but I had 15 hours on a plane from Sydney to LA. And I had made the decision that on that flight, I was going to really think through all our problems. So I wrote a bit of a book on that flight. I came back to Perth and I called the 4 shareholders together who were all in the business. And I rang up the Esplanade in Fremantle and I said, can I book a room? And they said, all we've got is the ballroom. So it was a very amusing day because there was this little table in the center of the ballroom at the Esplanade and all 4 of us sat around that table. And I told everybody, we need to totally reinvent ourselves. And it started the journey of role clarity. And it was only the beginning of the journey. But the message I can share with everyone today is even if you do the first level of role clarity is say, okay, and what was our role clarity then? And what do I recommend? Understand that in an SME, you're an owner. That's one role. Separate it out. You're a director, so you have a fiduciary responsibility. Understand that role. Then you're a leader in the business. And so you may have functional leadership and you may have on leadership. To be frank with you, most SMEs don't do much on leadership, funnily enough. They tend to evolve out of crunching the transactions. And so consequently, in 2003, I started to realize that I had roles in the business. I was a function leader, I was a director, and I was an owner. And that realization changed the direction of the business. And I'm so glad that I picked that up at that time, because in 2000, so if we progress forward, and I'll show you this where we went from 2003 to 2010. So just to give you some idea, we went from 24 people to 100 people or around that in that period of time. And if we hadn't ventured on a journey of really investing in this role clarity and this architectural, re-architecting our business, I am sure that we would have either failed or the people in the business would have all burnt out. We would not have been able to maintain the energy and build a culture that could sustain. And so I'm incredibly passionate about this area, and it just seems to be a topic that isn't very It's not discussed much, and yet I think it's central to being able to, if you want to execute on having a healthy culture, build a great recruitment process. To build a great recruitment process, you have to invest in organizational design. So you have to say, okay, where does that recruitment process sit? So I'm going to give you a metaphor, and this is how I've had the good fortune to be able to be involved in building, and I actually have a sweet, I like architecture, building architecture. And my brother-in-law and I have now done 7 different building projects together, one of which was commercial and the others have been residential. Now, in those different projects, some of them were big renovations, some of them were building new places. But what I started to realize is that the incredible similarity between the role of a building architect and the role of an organizational architect, and I don't want to make this sound like this is not achievable for any SME. Any SME leader, if they choose to, that there's just simple things you can do to develop your capability and your craftsmanship in this area. And that does, I was talking to Roma yesterday, and I was saying probably my greatest frustration with the startup community and what I've heard in the last 10 to 15 years is that the craftsmanship of business building or SME building or being an entrepreneur, that craftsmanship, it is a craft. And it is a craft that you learn empirically, but it's not something you can go to university and learn it and then go and do it. It's an adult learning type process, but there's learning that you can do, and hopefully in these series, I'm contributing to that learning. But the idea is that you can actually implement it in your business soon after. And I think this concept of craftsmanship and building our craftsmanship in SME building is an important thing. And I think that if we look at any other discipline, whether it be, if you want to be a surgeon, electrician, a plumber, an engineer, it doesn't, you go off and you get some accreditation. Now, there's no need for an accreditation because going into a business, it will sort you out for sure. I mean, it'll either, but there's, what we've got to do is maximize our probability of success. And so building craftsmanship is an important thing. And so I think that this area is an area that I strongly recommend putting some learning into. So that building architecture metaphor, what I'm saying is when you build a business, you design a building and then build it, you're thinking about function and form. So, often, depending upon which architect you talk to, form informs function. Now, what do they mean by function and form? Well, okay, I could say functionally, right? I want to build a building that is entirely functional. It's got a standard height ceiling. It's, the toilet isn't in the kitchen, and we've got some, it's entirely functional. But if we start to really say we want a building that really is in service of the people, so that they can really use that building well, that's a different thing. And I think this is the nuance of companies and SMEs and businesses, is that we want to make sure that we can maximize productivity. We want to make sure that it's a place that people want to work in. So if you want to execute and have a good culture, we'll invest here, because this is a lot about the how of getting all the other stuff done. So you're going to have a good intent and a good values constitution, but if you don't design a business that is actually reflects that values constitution, then it's a nonsense. So I can give you a really, really clear way of thinking about this. The way that most people think of a business is looking at a business in cross-section by saying, okay, I have it's a power hierarchy, essentially. And it's not about flow. So if you think about that concept, if you have a value that's about, let's build drive an adult workplace where everyone's a peer, and we understand our accountabilities, and we understand, okay, somebody's going to be a team leader, but we're all going to be accountable. Well, don't put in a power hierarchy where the person at the bottom is micromanaged. So you can't, if you want to deliver on that value, you've got to design your business so that it is actually connects to that value. And I think these are simple ideas, really, but difficult to implement. And hopefully what I share today will help a bit with that implementation. So what we did through this period from 2003 to 2010 is that we started to recognize that everybody's playing their own video. Now, I know that, you know, people on this call probably go, well, of course everyone's playing their own video. But it's interesting how much the learning I had about just how different people had their mental model for how our business worked was so different that we couldn't innovate it. We couldn't get feedback from people to improve it because their mental model of how it worked was so different. And so that lack of clarity and it led to disorder, because people would say, we need to improve this. So I've got another little metaphor that explains this. I've got let's just say we're all in the fluid receptacle game, and one person's looking at a glass, and the other person's looking at a coffee cup. And the person they're both fluid receptacles, but the person looking at the coffee cup says, how about we make that more transparent? To the person that's looking at the glass, and the person looking at the glass says, well, what's wrong with you? It's already transparent. That happens in business every day, even in small teams. So if we're going to try and build our businesses so they can really be what Peter Senge called the learning organization, so it can learn, it can improve, it can get better, then we need to be able to provide the mechanisms for people to give feedback, but we actually have to give them a picture that is somewhat gives them some focus so that they can comment. So if you look at that picture at the bottom of that, we ended up saying we've got an axle, it's a wheel, and that the administrative functions of the business are in the axle. And then spinning around that axle, we have the purple wheel. And the purple wheel is the research and development wheel. They're the people that are going to build the product. The blue wheel is going to be the wheel that deploys the product. Now, and intentionally, we put the board of directors at the bottom, not at the top. But if you look at, we use this diagram and we decommission the org chart. Obviously, there was more data behind this as to who was in them and all that sort of thing and what the roles were inside. But as a way of discussing the organization, this became the central focus, and people would have conversations to this diagram. So it helps with concepts like flow, the order of things. So for instance, it starts with business development, then it goes to implementation, then it goes to support, and then the feedback each time goes back to business development. It also goes back into the inside wheel for the research and development. But the concept of flow is a really important thing so that people can see the order of things as well. So the upshot of all this was the importance of starting to head toward, okay, how are we organized, and let's head in the direction of role clarity. And I'm going to elaborate more on role clarity now. So the question that I put out on LinkedIn some weeks ago was, are you designed by personality or do you have role clarity, right? And the point and the part to resilience here is that if you have role clarity, it makes you more agile. It does make you more agile and creates the conditions for the handover of roles, and it actually does contribute to the reduction of key people risk. Whereas personality-based approach, when in 2003, I realized there's just Bill doing work, and I was doing all sorts of different work in all sorts of different areas of my business, but nobody had any visibility of what roles I was doing. And so, which is a mess. And the sooner you can clean that up, the better. You know, and I think this is where architecture connects to culture and behavior, because our ego wants us to be central to things, right? So, you know, we want to make ourselves, you know, if you're not conscious of how your ego is playing out, you actually design a star hub system and say, make everyone dependent on me. But of course, we know that is highly, highly fragile. And I'm going to talk about, there was a book that came out about anti-fragility, and I love the term, and I can give you the reference to the book later, but it's, I think the thing I took away is just this concept of anti-fragile, and how do you design to be anti-fragile. And so wherever you've got a system that is a star hub where you've just got a central person, it's a good idea to say, no, well, how do we actually design ourselves so that we don't have that key person risk and that personality centric approach. So, because this is the difference between resilience and a better business today. Because a better business today, your financial metrics might be saying, oh yeah, we're doing very, very well. But it only takes that person being ill or taken out, and then the star hub doesn't work anymore. It can break down with speed. So I think that, you know, what roles are involved in recruiting a customer, for instance? What roles are involved in recruiting an employee? So this concept of role clarity is an essential item in building a resilient business. And you know, I'm making the joke here about Kill Bill, but that was when I really started to realize, if I'm going to build a business that is truly sustainable, the first person to actually make sure is not a key person, a person that can actually leave the business, is myself. And if I can do it for myself, we can do it as a habit, an organizational habit, or something that we build as a capability in our business. Okay, so there we go. Role clarity is key. And so a lot of people say, well, what is a role? What is a role? And I'm going to share some material here that, and I apologize if anybody on the call is, I'm, you know, teaching how to suck eggs or whatever, but I really do think that I haven't come across many people that have really, really lent into what a role is in business. And they get a position confused with what a role is. And a role is totally abstracted from any personality in your business, whereas a position is a one-to-one to a person in your business. And so you might have a position that actually is made up of a set of roles, and that position has a certain remuneration setting for a certain geography. But the set of roles are generic, and you can have, like we had geoscientific data analysts in Perth, Calgary, and Santiago, but their position was different in every country because their remuneration and other things were different in every country. So the key here then is let's really break down what with a business, with and I'll keep saying an SME business because I really say that this is more doable in an SME, and it gets more and more complex the larger the organization. So if we're talking about thousands and thousands of people, you know, maybe that's why power hierarchies are so prevalent. It's very difficult to do what we're talking about here in very, very large organizations. But in an SME, you can do this with speed if you want to and lean into it. So an organization gets broken up into a set of key organization accountabilities. We call those key organizational functions. So a function has a set of key organizational accountabilities, right? So let's go to a typical sort of key organizational function might be engage the market. Engage the market, or sell our offering, or deliver our offering. And I'm going to show some pictures later. So if it's to sell our offering, well, the key accountabilities are to be able to understand our offering and communicate it effectively so that you can successfully recruit customers, right? Or whatever, something like that. But within that key organizational accountability of selling the offering, then you might have multiple teams. And so each team will have some different accountabilities. And then on that team, it's going to be made up of roles, and you're going to get down to role accountabilities. So, you know, within a business like Acquire, for instance, we had roles like a customer recruiter, we had product owner, and then we had a key organization function leader. Now, each one of those roles is very different. It has a different set of, each role requires a different set of attributes, which are sort of like the characteristics that will help them execute that role, and then capabilities, which are the skills required to execute that role. So I know this is a really dry, this can be a really, really dry topic, but I guess it's, I think I've underscored as we've gone through this today that this is a really powerful area that if you can put this in your business, you will get you get a lot of value back. So let's keep moving then with this, what is a role? So we've got I spoke about attributes, capabilities, and accountabilities. So let's just pull this apart and really make sure that we've got this understood. Attributes are the character, you know, so if you're going to have a person that's going to do a role in a business development team, it's highly unlikely that they're shy. It's highly unlikely that they're introverted. Normally, somebody on a BD team is an extrovert. And so you're going to code, okay, for a role that's for somebody that's going to be a customer recruiter and sell the offering. We know that the attributes, one of the attributes is perhaps somebody that's extroverted, right? And likes people and wants to engage people. Another attribute might be they have a certain sort of behavior that empowers them to build trust with speed, which is a key attribute of somebody in that role. The capabilities, however, the capabilities are more, you know, commercial training, you know, experience in selling, and are far more about the skills associated with being able to execute that role. So the accountabilities though, and I want to make a difference between a KPI and an accountability, right? A KPI, the accountability is something that is clear in being able to communicate a role and that role should be evolving and be persistent through time. Whereas a KPI might be more ephemeral. So the accountabilities here, you know, to recruit a customer, you know, a capacity to present the offering, the capacity to construct and deliver the proposal, a capacity to negotiate commercials. Now, the beauty here is once I've done the work to just do that little bit of work, that's all I've got to do to define a role, I can then pin the role to a person. And that then means that instead of being doing a job description for a person, I'm actually pinning a set of roles to a person, but that then means the roles themselves are mobile. I can actually hand them over, and you can start to think of them a little bit more like playing cards, because if you can create internal mobility, you know, so this concept is a little obtuse at one level, but if you get it, it's really powerful in your business. So let's keep going. So just the second question we put out is, have you assessed whether you can deliver your offering more effectively? Now, this is such a big topic, because what we want to do is use architecture to design how we deliver our offering so that we can optimize value to the customer and value to us. That's the holy grail of business, is how do we actually deal with an abundance model where both the customer's happy and we're happy, right? So often in business, we can have a situation where we're delivering really well to the customer, but the business itself is not generating any value, and it's a threat to its own sustainability. You go the other way, and I shared the trusted advisor equation, and it's driven by self-interest. So you actually build a model that is very much about self-interest, and the customer's not happy. So for us to be successful in business, we need to be able to integrate across that boundary, and we need to have both things. It's an and, it can't be an or. So that then gets down to design thinking. There's a book by Roger Martin. Now, I'm going to say I read Roger Martin's book, but what I've got to do is qualify. It's a good read, but most of the examples were corporations, and I didn't think that the examples were of any value at all to me. I think that Peter Senjay's Fifth Discipline is just a bridge too far. It's a really dense book, but brilliant. But I think you really got to be into it if you want to go with that. I will give you some references to this that are perhaps, you know, better depending upon what level you're at in this particular topic, but I can give you something that's a bit more accessible. However, what I wanted to get across in answering this question is a lot of businesses are good at doing, and they're good at doing at a particular point in time, dependent on the people that are in the room at that time. What we're trying to do in Resilient Business Thinking is say, we're going to make ourselves highly capable, and we're going to build ourselves in a way where different people will be in the room over the period, over the future. And not only will we be okay and meet their level, we can actually use their learning to get better. And so if you want to do that, you can't just crunch transactions and say, do. You got to say, why do we do it? How do we do it? Do it. So if you get into this sort of mindset and you get into an architectural or organizational design mindset, you're actually really leaning into why and how a lot more. And why and how are where the resilience comes. Because I've come across so many good companies that are just incredible at doing. They're just very good at doing. And as long as everything's a steady state and they can maintain the people in the room that they've currently got and the market doesn't change too much, they're good. But that is not the way the world is. And I'm hoping that people really appreciate, you know, I mean, COVID-19 came out of nowhere, but we've had these hits before. GFC hit in 2008. You know, in the resources industry, 2012 to 2016. I mean, oil and gas is price is just recovering. But I mean, who could believe a negative oil and gas price? So we get these, we know that it's not a steady state world. We just know it's not, but we don't seem to say, okay, it's worth just putting 1 hour a week or 2 hours a week of investing in saying it's not a steady state world. What do I do for myself? Or what do I do for my business? And I guess, you know, one of the big messages, hopefully, that we take out of these sessions is that people can start to say, well, it is worth it. It is worth putting, you know, it's like going to the gym to keep fit, you know, like it's worth it, right? I mean, if I can stay away from type 2 diabetes or some of these other ailments, which I can stay away from by going to the gym or running or keeping my eating well, or it's the same thing. Business health is the same. We've got to, even if it's just a little amount of time at the beginning, we've got to create new habits to say, okay, I'm going to allocate 2 hours a week to why and how. I'm going to say, yeah, how will I design my organization to actually deliver? So on that, I'll just give you some additional thinking here. I saw a metaphor between computer networks and organizational design. And I've been talking about StarHub, but the left-hand picture is where we were in 2003. What we went to in 2010 was more like the middle picture, right? Where we actually had a whole bunch of different teams. We distributed a lot of the load, but we still had a team leader manager mindset. Now, the one on the right is not really the picture. There's a different way that can be drawn, but basically, if you look at it, the first one is centralized, the second one is decentralized, and the third one is distributed. Now, we know that if we're going to build an energy network and we can have distributed, renewable energy solutions on different nodes, as opposed to one central power station, we know that that's a more anti-fragile, it's a more resilient model. And so when you build your business, you can actually start thinking, okay, well, you don't have to go into this in a big way at the beginning, because it doesn't matter when you're 10 people that much, right? But as long as as you grow, you actually say, well, how do I want this to work so that I build my business in a way that's going to be able to work when different things hit my business. And I think this is a more advanced topic, and so don't invest too much in this now, but it is a really interesting point, because we ultimately need to design for distributed decision making if we're going to make ourselves more anti-fragile. So I've got 2 more slides before we go into some questions. I know that I do apologize for this being a bit more dense. I noticed the numbers are down because perhaps people thought, this topic is that way, but I appreciate that there might be quite a few questions here, but I just wanted to show you this picture, and it might look like, well, there's a lot on that page, but we've been speaking about 4 different zones, right? And we've been talking about different things in 4 different zones. And we're saying to ourselves, well, okay, well, how would I build teams in a business, right, that actually integrate across these 4 zones? And I know that I can break up the key organizational accountabilities across these. So we call these, each one of these boxes, we call these key organizational functions, right? So, and it's typical in a business that you have somewhere between 5 and 7 key organizational functions. And as you can see, that what I've done here is I've said this is a typical business-to-business service company where there's going to be, in the value stream, in the economic engine, you're going to have, you're going to need to engage the market to actually generate interest in your offering. Then you're going to have to recruit customers where you've actually got customers that say, yes, we want your offering, and they're going to sign up to it. So there's the exchange of value. Then you deliver your offering, and then you support your customers. Now, this particular model works in lots of organizations, and what you call each one of these, you could call them, you can change the names in them or whatever, or you can get rid of them or add more. But the concept is, I believe it's elegant, because then you know that you've got an accountability model for all of the zones. And it took me a long time to learn this. And that's why I'm in this business now. I'm trying to fast track it for people, because there's no need for people to have to go through the chaos I went through. There's just no need. There's no value in doing it, to be frank with you. And it's like a surgeon having to go back to trying to do surgery in 1850. Well, they don't. They get taught today based on techniques today, so that they don't have to go through all the learning through history. In the same way with architecture, I think that there's a lot you can leverage off other people. And in this case, I just wanted to show you that it's our research in the last 6 years that SMEs rarely have very well, they haven't generally thought about this very much at all, but they don't have very well established foundational key organizational functions around architecture, healthy culture, and finance. And they've done quite well, often, up in the value stream. And I think it's good companies are going to build these foundational areas because they're essential to any form of scalability of your business. So with that, I'm just going to finish off with one last thing, and that is to say that if you'll get these materials, and you can say, okay, well, what are the key organizational functions in my business? And then you can say, well, okay, who's the leader of it, and what's the purpose of that key organizational function, and what are their key accountabilities, and what are the key roles, and who's there? Now, I think this exercise, we facilitate this exercise, but I think that you could I think most people could go through and do this thinking for their business. And then once you've done that design work, how you actually implement it in your business, well, that's a whole other thing, but I think it's just well worth doing this sort of work. Okay, so we've gone to 11:50, and I'm going to leave it there. I decided to go all the way through and not have questions on the way through because of the nature of the topic again. But I'm good to go to field some questions.